What's up, design family, and welcome to another episode of FittDesign TV. So glad to have you back on the channel. If you guys are new to this channel, we put out amazing content on a week-to-week basis on all things sportswear, graphic design, sourcing, and manufacturing. On today's episode, we'll be looking at hang tags. With so many options out there, I wanted to give you guys my in-depth guide on how to pick the right hang tag for your upcoming collection. So we'll go through the different components of a hang tag, and then we'll discuss the different materials that you should be considering. I'll give you guys my favorites, so if you guys have ever been interested or have wondered what's the perfect hang tag for your next collection, watch this video and you're going to find out. Hey guys, and welcome to FittDesign TV. So glad to have you here. On this channel, we discuss all things sports fashion, graphic design, manufacturing, and technology. We'll discuss key topics, answer pressing questions, and provide actionable steps on starting your own product line. If you're interested in any of the above topics, stick around. You're in for a good one. So in order to begin, we first have to understand what a hang tag is and what its different components are. If you've ever bought a t-shirt from any major retailer like H&M, Zara, you've obviously seen what a hang tag can look like. Usually it's a piece of paper with a brand name and other types of information on it. So what do I recommend that you include in a hang tag? Well, if you're starting off, keep it simple. The more information you add, the more clutter the hang tag can look. So you definitely want to include your brand name. It should be clear and visible. 2, you need to include where people can find you. In this day and age, social presence is really important, and you want to give people a clear way to find where you're going to be at online so they can further engage with you. I definitely recommend adding one social handle, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, and then your website. Your website is so important. People are most likely going to engage commercially with your brand on your website. So make sure that your website is visible at all times, whether it's on the front or on the back. Again, please be careful not to commit like an overkill on the hang tag. You don't want to add too much information. It can look cheap and it can look super tacky. And the last thing is what I like to call as a brand identifier. Is it a slogan? Is it an illustration? Is it a graphic? Whatever it may be, it should serve to create a bit more depth to your brand. A good hang tag can serve as an essential tool in your arsenal to bring out what your brand is all about. And when it comes to the different components of your hang tag, we're going to consider a couple things. We're going to consider the tag itself. Is it a single layer or is it multi-layered? We're going to consider the punched out eyelet where the drawstring goes through. And then we're going to consider the actual string itself. Those are the main components, and I'll be running you through the different materials that you guys will need to consider for these components. So the first and one of the most important categories of hang tag materials that we're going to be looking at is paper. Like I said, this is by far the most common, and it's what we see on the market on a day-to-day basis. When it comes to picking the right paper material, understand that there are a ton of options out there. By far the most prevalent are typically craft material, so craft paper, corrugated paper, insulating paper, recycled paper, art or coated paper, and those are one of some of the many options out there. In terms of what I recommend, especially starting off, at a low cost and most flexible option is a coated art paper. Art paper usually comes in white, although it's also common to see it in other colors, but that's more custom sourced. But art paper is going to be your best bet by far. Usually the idea about art paper is because it's so widely available and it can come in a variety of different finishes, you can have it in either a laminated or non-laminated finish, and you'll be able to tell the touch and feel of a laminated versus non-laminated. Laminated typically helps to seal in the print better so that it retains or has a better durability over time. When it comes to the weight, you have to consider the grams per square meter of the material. If you have something that's too thin, it's going to appear cheap, and it may actually end up getting damaged in transit if you're packing, and it's not a good look on your brand when your customer receives your amazing products with a damaged hang tag that's folded in half and all creased up. At the same time, if you make it too thick, you're going to have a overwhelmingly thick and heavy hang tag that doesn't necessarily match the aesthetic that you're going for. Also, if your hang tag is too bulky, it could actually detract your users from your brand. So what does that mean? You're hanging up a t-shirt and you have an extremely heavy and bulky hang tag. It's going to be pulling on your t-shirt. It's going to create a very awkward look and finish to your product. So it won't make sense. You want to find something that's in the middle. Typically, I recommend going for a total weight of between 500 and 700 grams, and you can achieve that two ways. You can do a single layered material that's actually 500 to 700 grams. That material is actually a lot more expensive to find, and it's actually going to be just tougher to work with. You're also going to run into issues if you're printing on either side of the hang tag, because you're going to have to ensure alignment, and if anything doesn't line up correctly, you're going to have more of a quality control issue down the line. So what I like to do is I like to double layer my hang tags. And the way that you do that is essentially you would print out two different sets, and at the end they'd be joined together with an adhesive. There are some pros and there are some cons. The pros here are it's cheaper to do, you still get a thick structured hang tag, and at the same time it makes the lining up of the prints on either side of the hang tag a lot easier and a lot more accurate. So you're gonna get less of those issues down the line when it comes to misalignment. But what are the negatives? Well, the negatives are one, cost. Because you're purchasing a much more expensive material to begin with, it's gonna cost more. Also, these thicker fabrics or these thicker cards are tougher to print on because of their rigidity. So the types of printers that can take on these cards are going to be a lot more specialized. So that can also bump up your cost and your MOQ. And usually what's available on the market for this art paper is typically white. So if you have a black hang tag, you're going to see a white border, which is not an issue, but if you're trying to maintain a certain look, it can detract. So do bear in mind. It all depends on what your budget is and what your capabilities are from an MOQ and a cost standpoint. But by far, art paper is going to be your best bet. I recommend double layered, and I definitely recommend going something around a 300 to 350 grams single layered, and then double layering that in order to achieve that overall thickness required. Go for a laminated look. It's going to help maintain durability over time, and it's just going to give a much more polished look and feel to your hang tag. Category 2 of hang tag materials that you may not have thought of before is actually metals. And there are a variety of different metals that we see widely available on the market, especially for hang tag materials. You have copper, you have steel, you have alloys, and you actually have stainless steel. There are others, but these are the most common. So copper is great, it's widely available, it's relatively cheap, but it's quite soft. So over time, it can wear out. With iron, you're getting much more of a thicker finish and something that's going to retain its durability, but it can oxidize if it's not treated well, and at the same time, it's quite heavy. Alloy is going to be great, it's going to be lightweight, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be more expensive, and that may bump up your MOQ as well. At the same time, stainless steel has a super premium finish, and it's going to elevate the brand structure and feel overall. However, it is a lot more expensive and tougher to cut through, so you may have to pay some mold fees in terms of how you're going to get your design onto the metal. So when it comes to translating a design onto metal, there are a variety of ways. You can either print directly onto it, you can engrave and print, you can laser etch, and you can punch out. So when it comes to punching out, you can either use a water cutter, which runs a very fine beam of water to cut through the metal. You can also laser cut if the material is not too thick and it's able to withstand the heat. So it depends, there are some limitations there. And at the same time, you can create a stamp that punches out of the metal. It all depends on what your final finishes are. Metal hang tags are a great way to elevate your brand, but do bear in mind they're a lot more expensive. There are mold fees associated with them because you have to create specialized machinery and tooling in order to deal with customized designs on metal. At the same time, it's going to add some weight to your garment. It may not be suitable for all types of brands, so do bear that in mind. For example, if you're a brand that preaches sustainability, recycled fabrics, it's a yoga brand or it's a nutrition, a health and wellness brand, having a metal type of hang tag may not fit that brand structure too well. Yes, it looks premium, but it just looks off, and it may serve to counteract what you're building towards. So do bear in mind what your brand messaging is. This would be a lot more suited towards a more masculine and aggressive brand, like a powerlifting brand that actually has that steel or metal connotation. So do bear that in mind and be conscious who your end user is. You don't want to marginalize your user base by introducing a material to your hang tags or into your core branding elements just for the sake of introducing it. Category 3, like metals, can be unusual and something that you may not have considered for use in hang tags and even packaging items in general. And that's animal materials, whether that's leather, fur, or even synthetic leather. They serve as a great way to elevate your brand and to add some much needed depth if appropriate. When it comes to different types of materials you can use within this space, you obviously have your natural leather, like your cowhides. You have things like synthetic leather that are typically your polyurethane blends, which is a synthetic compound used to recreate leather. And you also have furs, which can be both natural and unnatural depending on what options you go with. Like I said, they're a great way to create some much needed brand depth. And when it comes to leathers, you can have a variety of different finishes, textures, colors, depending on how you dye. Usually these types of hang tags are extremely durable and they feel robust. So they are going to give longevity to these packaging materials, and they can almost be seen as a sort of accessory and an extension of the product itself. Do bear in mind that they are more expensive given their durability and the fact that if you're buying natural cowhide, that's just more expensive than using art paper or craft paper. But you get the added benefit of something that's more durable and feels much more luxurious. One of the limitations with leather is because of their finishes, it's kind of hard to get printing onto it. So you're kind of limited in the way that you can apply designs onto your tags. What you're usually stuck with is heat stamping or embossing. And when it comes to embossing, it's what you see on denim leather patches, and usually they're finished with some sort of print. But you do need to stamp them first, and in terms of adding additional depth and additional layers to these tags, it is a lot more tough. So do bear that in mind. You have some limitation in that sense, but you are getting a much more refined and luxurious finish and something that's more durable. Again, the same thing with metal. If it doesn't match your brand structure and your messaging, you definitely don't want to be looking at leather. It wouldn't make sense if you're a vegan-based brand that preaches the powers of veganism to incorporate leather materials into your brand identity. It just doesn't add up. So do bear that in mind and approach it with a bit of caution. Use leather and animal materials only if it makes sense to your brand. Category 4 is one of my favorites, and it's a way to add a lot of warmth and coziness to your brand. It can be great for sleepwear brands or other brands that deal in more intimate type clothing. So it's stuff like textile-based materials, whether you're using canvas, you're using chemical fibers, fleeces, cotton fibers. Cloth materials on hang tags add much needed warmth, they're soft to the touch, and they feel very familiar. They're relatively inexpensive. Obviously, they're more expensive than paper, but they are a great option to add a nice touch and feel to your finished packaging product without incurring an additional cost that is excessive. They come in a variety of different patterns, prints, weaves, knits, and you can really customize textile materials to match the aesthetic that you're going for. Again, be conscious of the aesthetic and the brand that you're trying to portray, because having the right type of materials in your packaging is key. It's the first thing that people touch and engage with when purchasing from your brand. So you want to make sure that your packaging is on point and matches the messaging that you're trying to put out. Last but not least is our category 5, and this category is centered around plastic-based materials. And there are a ton, but two that really stand out: PVC and silicone. We'll do another video on really what the differences of PVC and silicone are. I'm sure you guys have come into contact with these materials before, whether it's on printing items or other types of materials based on the garment. But when it comes to hang tags, those are by far the two most common. PVC, just in a nutshell, is slightly cheaper than silicone, but it's a bit tougher, so it's less easy to bend, and it has a little less stretch. It also tends to wear out a little bit faster over time, so it can crack over a certain period, whereas silicone will hold up better over time. Also, silicone kind of has a bit more friction to it. PVC has somewhat of a smoother finish. Silicone will grab on to your skin a little bit better, so it has a bit more friction, which some people like, some people don't like. It depends on the final use case scenario. But with PVC and silicone, we can treat them both very similarly. They're both poured, so we usually create molds and we pour our molds in. So it's a great way to create branding elements that are embedded into the tag design directly, that's going to be extremely durable over time. With both PVC and silicone, that idea of molding creates a very permanent finish. We can also color the mold, so you can have different layers, different colors, different finishes, and you're ultimately only limited by your imagination when it comes to the types of designs that you can implement in silicone. Now that we've discussed the different materials that you're using on your tags, what are some ways to mix and match? Well, we discussed your single layered hang tags and we've discussed your double layered hang tags. Let's just say you have 2 layers of hang tags. One great way that I love to add depth to my brand is I use a paper-based core hang tag and I'll layer it with a plastic-based PVC or a frosted PVC finish. What that does is 2 things. Well, it completely creates a layered effect without eclipsing from the information on my paperboard material. Let's just say on my paperboard, I'm adding my slogan, my website, I'm adding a bunch of core essential information that I want my customers to be able to identify and to read at all times. Instead of layering it with another opaque hang tag that it's going to distract from the core elements that I've created, I'm actually going to layer with PVC. I'll frost it so that it gives a bit more of a depth to it so that it's not creating a extremely transparent finish on the PVC, and I'll add my branding in a silk screen or a heat transfer print onto the PVC, and I'll try to incorporate the design so that when I line up the hang tags, they kind of speak to each other so that contextually your PVC branding makes sense in relationship to your paperboard branding. These are one of the many ways that we have to approach things as designers to make sense of the materials that we're using and the overall composition that we're creating. I love layered hang tags. They allow you a lot more freedom and flexibility to really bring out something that's unique. We'll also have to consider the remaining 2 components of most hang tags. Well, one is, how do we attach these hang tags onto our garments? Usually with a string. So what are the main materials that we see on the market? Typically they're as follows. You have twill material, which is great. You have wax coated string, and that's by far the most common. You can have a leather piece, and you can have a satin ribbon piece, as well as a plastic based either PVC or silicone string that's gonna give a lot more stretch to it. So do bear in mind that the type of string used should mimic and should speak to the materials used in your hang tag that are obviously speaking to your brand structure and identity. But when it comes to the main types of strings, those are the ones we recommend. Make sure to pick the right one for your brand. The last item that we'll think of is our eyelets. So you have your hang tags. Let's just say they're double layered. How do they attach together? Well, we're gonna punch a hole through them usually, and we'll laminate that finish so that the edges of where it's punched through are not exposed. You can either leave it as a pure laminated finish, which kind of seals up that edge. You'll still be able to see it, but it'll be a lot less prone to tearing over time, or you can cover it with an eyelet. That's usually what I like to do, and there's a reason for it. Well, one is if you have a colored print on your hang tag, but you have a white paper, it helps to hide that exposed surface. So that can help tie everything in together. At the same time, bear in mind that this is your main point of tension. This is how your hang tag attaches to your garment. So you're usually going to have a string running through that hole that attaches somewhere onto the garment. And that's where you're going to be pulling from. So if you don't have a correct reinforcement for that hole, you could end up prematurely tearing it, and ultimately that's not a good look on your brand. So securing it with either a brass grommet or an eyelet or something that's plastic or something that's even a silicone or a PVC finish could be super, super beneficial towards maintaining the durability of that hang tag and really preserving it until your customer receives the hang tag and is ready to tear it off. So adding an eyelet there can only add to your design, but it can also increase the durability of your design. Again, brass is great, so that's going to be metal. We recommend definitely coating it with something. Usually what you'll do is they'll either plastic dip it or they'll spray it or they'll dip it with some sort of silicone or PVC, or you can look at other very similar types of finishes that are like silicone or PVC. Again, it depends on your finished product, but do not forget the importance of tying in your eyelet correctly with the rest of the hang tag design. If you guys have made it this far, I hope that you've learned a thing or two, especially when it comes to hang tags. It's a very small component of the overall packaging process, but it's something that I've definitely grown quite fond of. We've done a lot of different hang tag designs, and we're always looking for ways to create more depth and to have them speak to the brand. When you have a brand identity and you have a successful packaging structure and a philosophy, they work really well together. And that can only serve to make people fall more and more in love with your brand. And ultimately, this is what we're in the business of doing. We're trying to build brands, and I'm sure you are as well. If you guys think I missed out any key components of the hang tag design world, please feel free to leave it in the comments. If you guys enjoyed this video and you want us to do more videos on similar packaging items, let us know which ones. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to FittDesign TV. Until next time, stay awesome.